Welcome, everyone, to Howling Coyote. And tonight we have the pleasure of having Jen Rowett, who's in the Department of Counseling of the Faculty of Education at the University of New Brunswick, and a good friend of our most revered hero, Albert Marshall, who invented a duoptomunk, or two-eyed seeing, in the Western world, though I think it probably existed in the indigenous world for centuries. And so I'm really pleased to have Jen here. And I thought we would start by I've had Jen before, and I thought we would start with just asking Jen, so what are you passionate about tonight? Like what's exciting you today? And
Well,
we'll go from there.
um, Julie and Lewis, and as you have water in front of me, so I really want to begin. Oh, can you hear me? Yeah, I just froze there for a second. I really want to begin by just expressing my deep appreciation for this beautiful land that the Woolstickway people have been taking care of and continue to take care of since time immemorial. I've been a guest in Woolstickway territory all of my life, and I have just a deep appreciation as I've been working and playing in community spaces for so long. So I really want to begin by acknowledging that probably being close to the land and being able to work and play in such a beautiful um, place is such a gift to me that I'm deeply appreciative for. Um, so I have kind of my I guess work related passions when I'm not out playing on the land and in the water um, are in spaces that involve uplifting Indigenous voice and teachings, and bringing them into spaces like the Academy. And I'm just returning, right now from community setting and being there all day practicing. Another thing that's very near and dear to my heart is still that very applied, practice oriented part of me. So spending time sharing space as a in a therapeutic kind of way in community, and really as a therapist, if you will, seeking to decolonize my practice in ways that encourage us to be doing our work in a way that where we're out on the land, and we're ways that feel more experiential and connected than the clinical space sometimes that we find ourselves in this profession. So that's what I'm really passionate about when it comes to like my work life as a professional. Um, as you know, Doctor, I think at this point he has so many honorary degrees. Doctor and Elder Albert Marshall has been a real friend and teacher, on this journey. And I feel like we've maybe known each other for much longer than we have even. And just, I guess one of the things that I really appreciate about Adawak the Monk and Two-Eyed Seeing is that it really brings forth the strengths of both knowledge systems. And Albert's collaborative way of working together is just something that I have such a deep respect for. How he encourages us to work together and to come together. So that kind of spirit really has influenced my work. And yeah, in the academy, we have a lot of different projects I could talk about, that we have going on at UMB. So I could share some of those with you that folks might find interesting. And oh, I can't hear you, Liz.
Oh, my bad. I think that would be really interesting. Yes.
So in terms of, we worked for my PhD work, which was performed, in collaboration with community members and elders here. Our intention was to look at how we can begin to decolonize our counselor education program, because like most counselor education programs in Canada, upon review, and what I sort of, intuitively knew from my own experience was that, they're set up to serve the mainstream, and they're set up to prioritize one particular knowledge system, which is, of course, Eurocentric ways of knowing, and a real silencing of other knowledge systems. And certainly in my own counselor education, process as a learner, there was no mention of, the land, and the original peoples of this land, and the effects of historical and ongoing effects of colonization, and a real silencing of any individuals who identify, as Indigenous by virtue of the way the program was taught in terms of prioritizing mainstream or Eurocentric knowledge systems. So in our work, we looked at what would be the important things to bring into, a counselor education program. How can we, uplift Indigenous knowledges? What's appropriate to share? And our findings were, kind of what we predicted they would be, which is, to more experiential learning, being out in community, more learning about the history, learning directly from elders and knowledge keepers and community members and Indigenous counselors and therapists. And I'm really excited because as a result of our work, we actually are the first counselor education program in Canada to have a required course in Indigenous knowledges. And the title of that course is Bilawida-Hazuwosuwagan, which is in counseling practice. And that's a Woolstickway term that one of our local elders, Oblosomwis and Melda Pearly, created, which means actions toward truth and reconciliation, walking the talk. So there's so many tokenistic ways that the university, I want to be respectful in how I say this, but there's just so many tokenistic ways that systems recognize Indigenous ways of knowing that really aren't that meaningful. And Bilawida-Hazuwosuwagan is about, moving beyond that, as is Etowaptamunk, into action-oriented ways that we can change systems. So this course, which we offered last July for the first time, and this July will be our second offering, was just incredible. Like we spent, it was just deeply moving to hear about the experiences of learners, and, to see them, to experience us all learning together, from elders and knowledge keepers, whether that be sometimes in the classroom, of course, COVID related challenges, but we still were out on the land and learning. For example, sweat lodge teachings, talking circles, water ceremony. There were a lot of things that we were able to do even within the space of, a global pandemic. There were things that we did that we didn't get to do that maybe we'll be able to do this summer because things have changed. But it was amazing to hear the students talk about how things were shifting inside of them. And of course, everybody was at a different place on their own journey, but to see the shifts in, learning and growth. And we had just incredible Indigenous students in the class who were so generous with sharing their teachings, which was not an expectation at all, but they were just so generous with sharing their knowledges with the rest of the class as well. So that was a real gift. And of course, one of my intentions is that there is an empowerment of those individuals who have been silenced in these settings. So it was wonderful to see, these individuals come to life, if you will, and feel valued. So another one of my passions in the academic setting would also be supporting Indigenous students and looking at the real. That was another finding, of our research, like how can we seek out and increase, the number of Indigenous students that we have in our program. How can we support them? And there's just a lot of practical ways, that can be done. So that it's not just about, people like myself who come from, Caucasian backgrounds, decolonizing our work, but it's actually about also increasing, for any Indigenous students, how can we make, education in that setting more accessible, if that is, and what they want to pursue. Because there's a lot of, when I think about, some of the students that I work with, they've already been helping professionals in their community, but they need those Western credentials for practical reasons. And so they come with a wealth of knowledge, a wealth of experience to share. So uplifting their voice is really important for me as well.
Indeed, and I think it's clear to those of us who work within the Indigenous world that traditional healing can be very powerful, and yet for the mainstream world, it's non-existent because we can't do randomized double-blind control trials with traditional healers because, number one, they reject allopathic categories, and number two, they would never do the same thing for every person with the same allopathic category because they would be looking to see, so what's out of balance and harmony with you, and how do I restore it? And it becomes a complete mismatch between conceptual schemes. And what's interesting to me is that there is no awareness in the mainstream research community that the categories that had been invented might be quite arbitrary.
Yeah.
They might not be relevant categories to another system of healing. And that was illustrated to me. I brought a blood healer to a blood tribe, First Nation, to a conference in Alberta and for a panel, and a nurse in the audience asked him how he would treat arthritis. And he said, I don't know her. Why don't you bring her around to the house tomorrow and I'll let you know. And he knew what he was doing. He knew that his tongue was in his cheek, but it was a beautiful answer because it put in juxtaposition the two conceptual systems so clearly and so beautifully. And I wondered if you could say a few more words related to that.
Yeah. Well, I really appreciate you sharing that. And I think for me, like one of the challenges, like from a I guess another example that comes to mind actually from last summer, one of our Indigenous practitioners. Well, actually, she's a practitioner and she's a graduate student. Brought one of the few Indigenous assessments that exists in terms of like a kind of a clinical assessment, if you will, that has actually been validated and designed for Indigenous peoples. So she distributed, this assessment for all of these counselors in training, and they were like, "What?" Like, and we didn't, give them a preamble, and it was just such a humbling experience for them to understand what it feels like to not feel or see yourself in an assessment tool that has been, developed normally, for the mainstream, right? So what it would be like to be an Indigenous person who's, I don't use many formal, if any, actually at this point, formal assessments in my work because they're just not appropriate, and as you're getting at, like it's just such a mainstream Eurocentric notion that, one tool could be a good fit for everybody. So it was a powerful experience for these students to have to work through this assessment and just not see themselves in it. Like they just couldn't connect with most of the things, on this assessment. And so it was a powerful experience for them to understand, because of course, when most assessment tools have been designed for your culture and you see yourself in everything, you don't understand what it's like to not, see yourself, or to be forced to do something, for example, with a counselor where you just feel like, what is this, so that was a powerful experience. And I think another piece for me is, first of all, any research that I do at this point is the intent is always that it's in collaboration with, but I think even heading into the future is really led by, not just in collaboration with, but really led by, Indigenous peoples, or at least that's the shift that I see myself and the people that I work with moving toward. And also, I'm always challenging, and I know that I did, in my doctoral work, like, it just makes no sense to me that we place so much value in the academy on like empirical research, which has been around for such a limited amount of time. And here we have these knowledge systems that have like thousands of years of a different kind of evidence, and like you said, there's that evidence exists, like it's, but it's different, and it's not maybe done in such a way or written up in such a way that the academy, likes things to be done. So that's always a point that I like to challenge people on, is that, it's not that there hasn't been a lot of, that we don't have quite a body of research on ceremony. There's all kinds, there's thousands of years of evidence that these beautiful ceremonies are healing and the power of them. But no, you're probably not going to read about it in a journal article.
Yeah, isn't it unfortunate because this sort of reductionistic empiricist, you know, philosophy is so shut down. And I did a podcast with Walter Lindstrom from um, the Center for Addictions and Mental Health in Toronto. And he had been charged with finding all the evidence to support traditional healing to present to mainstream researchers. And what he discovered is that he couldn't because there were no randomized controlled trials, which is getting back to what I said earlier. And that what existed were really interesting to me and fascinating case series and some comparative studies. You know, for example, we did a study in which we looked at people who went to traditional healers, and we compared um, them to a matched sample with a, in a database of an electronic health record, because you know we thought, well, that gives you a benchmark of sorts. And yeah, I mean, the criticism would be that you're more motivated to healing if you go to a traditional healer. Well, that's important. That matters. That's not a confound. That's a variable. And it was just interesting to feel his frustration at not being able to talk to the mainstream. And I think we all feel that.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think that like happy with I'm happy that more value has been placed on, for example, this piece of qualitative work that we did that really did shift our entire, well, not our entire, I mean, it was the willingness of, you know, our faculty, our dean, our counseling program members, like the, you know, that collaborative spirit to like want to change things and want to be guided by, you know, the local indigenous, you know, voices and ways of knowing. So I'm grateful that that piece of qualitative work, which, as we know in the academy, sometimes is undervalued. But it was a very powerful piece because there were so many amazing experiences shared. And it really, like, even just people talking about the value of, as an example, ceremony and cultural practices as being healing, you know, naturally on their journey, was very, has been very helpful in, for example, learners understanding the importance of going and having the experience. So, for example, last summer, you know, when students, we couldn't, because of university regulations and COVID related rules, actually have a sweat lodge ceremony together. You know, we were able to gather around the sweat lodge, and later that evening, you know, those of us who we did have a sweat lodge ceremony, but the group of students helped get everything ready. And because of the stories that they heard and the teachings that they heard, many of them did come in the future, to attend ceremony, because they experienced, even in that setting, just the feel, and they could sense the energy, surrounding ceremony. Well, in fact, it was ceremony, because it was, very much talking circle. So it was a ceremony, really. So I feel like, as individuals, have those experiential experiences, it's quite powerful, in terms of their own learning and recognition, and placing more value on not just what they're reading, but what they're experiencing.
Yeah, yeah, definitely. And you made me think of a conversation I had last night at a annual staff meeting, greeting, whatever we call these things. And I was talking to another psychiatrist, and I was telling him about how I have a client who believes that a particular person is broadcasting thoughts into her mind and reading her thoughts. And we were talking about how the only way that I knew to be helpful to her was to do ceremony with her. And so that we would get together, we get together weekly, and we sing and we pray and we smoke the sacred pipe, and she's getting better. And um and it was really interesting because he came up with these sort of concrete reductionistic explanations for why she was getting better. And I thought, okay, but but really it's because the spirits are helping her. And it's because we have a relationship,
Yeah.
and um, we share a worldview,
Yeah.
you know, and um, and he was saying, well, medication doesn't work for delusions, and um, I mean, he was nice. He was saying it's great that this is working, but I was thinking, what an interesting juxtaposition of explanations. So for me, it's the spiritual explanation, and for him, it's the placebo explanation.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah, and I suppose that's explanatory pluralism or two-eyed seeing at work. He's got his perspective, and I have mine, and they can both be true. I mean, because I don't know. I think about Herbert Benson, who said that the placebo response should be renamed the self-healing response.
I love that. Yeah.
Yeah, yeah, and and I don't know. I mean, maybe could you say a few more words related to that?
Yeah. Well, I think, Lewis, like, it reconnects me to my own journey, right? And my own commitment to, like, ceremony, and my own personal experiences that I've had. And I think that, for me, the essence of two-eyed seeing is that existing within oneself, which, of course, you are such a beautiful example of, like, the embodiment of that. And I think, recognizing that, of course, different ceremonies, again, getting back to the example you were using earlier, may not resonate with every with each individual, but when there's a knowing, like when I think about, the group that we have this afternoon, and just to follow the energy, of where the energy of our group wanted to take us, which led, it was a grief, what we would call in the Western world a grief group, but we call it the circle of support. And it was just this beautiful journey where we went on a deeply spiritual, topics on like how we connect with our loved ones in the spirit world and how they send us signs, and just many shared perspectives, that are grounded, as you said, in a particular worldview or indigenous ways of knowing. And I don't know, whenever there's that, like the example that you shared, I still feel this like kind of devaluing of spirituality, or of like a different way of knowing or a different healing method, and so like for me, it's just so beautiful, and it's such an honor. There's another piece that I could talk about because related to this, because I'm really proud that our code of ethics as a profession has changed to include Eto'Optimunk and two-eyed seeing. And that was just like I felt like for many years, I was working, unethically in some regards, even though it wasn't unethical at all. It was very much a culturally responsive way, a decolonizing way, but with a Western mainstream code of ethics that I had to follow. At times I felt like I was walking some fine lines. So with our code of ethics, which and I would be referring to like, my regulatory body code of ethics in the province of New Brunswick, which has adopted the national code of ethics for counselors of the Canadian Counseling and Psychotherapy Association. And in 2020, well, when we were going through, when our amazing working committee was going through the process of updating the code of ethics that they naturally do every so many years, they added what's called a wise practice lens as one of the guiding ways to make ethical decisions. And that includes Eto'Optimunk now, and it includes the 7 sacred teachings. Like it even felt, this is going to sound silly, but it even felt unethical for me as a counselor educator to use words like love in the academy. And that just seems so bizarre because that's at the heart of what I do. It's the essence of what I do. Love is a part of like every single session, like every single connection, So to be able to feel so free now to like, use that kind of language and to ground it in, and to honor where that's coming from has been really freeing for me as a, helping professional, But, and we also have a section now in our code that is about working with Indigenous peoples. And again, really being guided by, the teachings and respectful of the protocols and the teachings of the territory and, spaces in which we live and play, and developing those relationships, and not just in the clinical setting, but like taking time. And that would be one thing, that of course Albert, I remember when I first met Albert, my first homework assignment was like, go and learn about the history, go and take, go and learn a lot more about the history of the past 500 years. That was, the first thing. And then learn more about yourself and where you came from, which I didn't really have a clue because I wasn't connected biologically, didn't know my roots. And then the third thing was to build relationships, which I'd been doing. But that was such an important piece, and as I, work with like students and learners, like non-Indigenous, I'm referring to, like, and just the importance of building relationships, and because of course Indigenous worldviews are grounded in relationality. And and then, when you are grounded in that foundation of knowing where you come from, knowing the history, of the past 500-600 years, and, building relationships, and then, very humbly, learning from. And so that's very much reflected in our code of ethics, which I'm really excited about because before 2020, it was more of a broader, being respectful of, diversity. I think, that would have been like, I'm saying it more broadly than it was. But now, because of all the collaboration that was done with, folks like Albert, many elders, and Indigenous scholars and practitioners across, what is now known as Canada, that section of our code of ethics just really, for me, frees me up to do my work in a good way, as a practitioner and educator.
Yeah, and I think that it brings us face to face with this mainstream concept of professionalization.
Yeah.
Yeah, which I find to be such bullshit.
Yes. Yeah. Yeah,
Yeah,
I hesitated to use that word. Even the
well,
term helping professional, I find
right, right. But it's a hiding, like people hide, and it's a mask that people put on to not be genuine
yeah.
and to hide their humanity.
Yeah.
And I think it gets back to what we're fighting, which is this transactional view of care, you know, and and we know that the indigenous perspective is relational, and in a relational perspective, you can't hide behind professional demeanor. You don't put on your mask and your white coat and pretend to be objective and rational, empirical, and all knowing. And, you know, it just doesn't work. And I don't know, I had that experience today. Um, I've been visiting a woman on the nearby reservation every week for, I don't know, quite a few weeks, maybe 20. Um, and to her credit, she's stopped drinking, and we've got her on a low dose of an antipsychotic, which has evened her out, and we've she figured out that she's probably prone to mania, which seemed pretty obvious because once upon she was telling me about staying up for 11 nights in a row and not being tired. So that was sort of a no-brainer. But but what I think mattered to me today was she was talking about um, how real it was to sit and talk with me,
Mhm.
and that was so different from all the other encounters she'd ever had with psychiatry. And we were sitting outside in her backyard, and she has a pet wild chipmunk that she feeds. and, and and she was putting food out for him, and he was coming and eating it, and you know, chattering away at us. And it was a beautiful day. It was a sunny day. Temperature was 24 degrees. You know, this is like, I think it was the hottest day yet this year in Maine. And and you know, I just felt so happy that we could be there doing this. And yeah, there was some medication involved, and and low dose. I mean, not a high dose, but but you know, when you look at this woman's childhood trauma, her ACE score is 10. You know, and and you know, we've got, she started drinking at age 8, and she's 65 now. She's been sober for a year, and I don't know. It just was like, I mean, it felt good to be in relationship with her. You know, like, she's not an object for me. She's a human being with whom I'm in relationship, and that would be so foreign to my colleagues. It would be so unprofessional for me to say this to my colleagues. You know, because to them she would be a patient, and
Right.
it would be all objective, and there would be no chipmunks.
As you say this, as you share this story, I have to laugh because there's like a bunch of squirrels running by, and I'm like, yeah,
They
yeah,
serve the trees.
yeah, yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, so I don't know. Can you say some more about that, about this whole professionalization thing, and relational, relational versus transactional, or
Yeah, and like what I kind of, so for example, last July, there were many students, learners who were taking um, this course at the end of their degree. And it was like they were, oh my gosh, I can be myself. I can be, just even the freedom, that they felt to be able to like be a lot more authentic, you know, and how indigenous knowledge is, and just, again, what you're speaking about, the relationality piece, um, was very uplifting and deeply moving for them, to start using words like, love. Not that my colleagues don't, because our counselor education program is, I guess I'd frame it more broadly in terms of like how you are in terms of the profession, rather than, the colleagues that I work alongside. But I think that many learners and students are disappointed when they come to the program and things feel so objectified and clinical at times, because most of us like come to these spaces out of a place of love. Like, from coming from mainstream culture, um, I love people. Like, that's why I chose this life path, would be better language for me to use, rather than it happens to show up as a profession because of the way that things are structured, because of colonialism and needing to, like, earn money and things like that. But I can imagine that if that wasn't our way of living, that I would, and I think back, and the stories that I've heard, naturally, that this was very naturally interwoven into, cultural practices. Counselors weren't needed. There were those people in community that, and there still are, obviously. So, I mean, that the helping profession has actually done a lot of um, damage, right? There, and it also has the potential to do a lot of damage if we don't understand the history between um, the impacts of colonization. And that was just, it's been huge learning for me over the decades, and it's been huge learning, as these students learn. It's amazing for me when I meet with folks, to hear about, what hasn't been, one of the things that I often ask folks, if they have worked with, you know, helping professional, will say, like, what was helpful, what wasn't helpful, like those kinds of things. And often it is, the relational pieces that are often missing, or more directive kind of approaches, like what you were speaking to, like as if I'm the expert on another person's journey, no. So, and that's one of the things that in a very practical way, I often, say to folks is, like, this is a kind of a journey where we're walking alongside each other. And as Albert would use that language of, co-learning, that we'll learn from each other together. Like, this is a collaborative journey. And to the degree that, I'm able to, like, really working to bring down any kind of what would feel like what you were describing, like that expert or all-knowing or some kind of superiority, but the reality is that has existed for so long that it needs to be broken down and it needs to be spoken about. So I really make a point of talking about it with, with clients and students, because it often is a surprise. And I want people to know that it's intentional, that the way that I want to work in a good way is very intentional. Yeah, so that's, for example, with our group, and I'm sure it's been very similar with you, just going in with that spirit of you each bring so much wisdom, and I may have a plan of, where we could go today and what we could talk about, but let's just see where our journey takes us, and let's see what we share, and let's see, the wisdom that comes from each of you, because it's not about one person coming in and saying, this is what works. That would be ridiculous. So even this afternoon, like, just so many beautiful teachings and wisdom and inner knowings and tools and strategies, and really just a perfect a perfect concoction of Adwaptawant monk, really, that happened. Yeah. So for me, that feels less, and also using, like, intentional self-disclosure too, which, as you know, Lewis is often frowned upon in a professional way. But the sharing of experience and letting people get to know me, because why would they trust me if I don't choose to share, anything about myself? And of course, it's done in a way that is authentic and intentional, but also, yeah, grounded in authenticity, so that people can actually get to know me. And I think that is really helpful in building relationship and trust and safety.
Yeah, I mean, I do the same thing. I mean, I tell personal stories, and I stop short of telling stories that aren't resolved, that
Yeah, yeah,
I'm deeply struggling with
yeah.
still. But telling, like, stories about past struggles seems to be really helpful. and it makes me a human being. And I
Yes.
think that's so important. And sometimes they become teaching tales, like how I figured out how to deal with something. I was I have a guy who's um, really angry and um, feels justifiably so. And and I told him a story about how I was wronged and felt angry and realized that expressing the anger would be self-destructive, and how I came to radical acceptance of the situation and moved on. And he found that really helpful.
Mm.
And I think that's our humanness. I mean, and there is an ethics, which is to tell stories, to share things that are helpful. To screen our experiences so that we share things that are potentially helpful, hope probably helpful, we hope,
Yeah.
and definitely not harmful.
Yeah.
Um, and and it makes us human, and people relate to it. And I think, I mean, all of the elders that I know told personal stories. I remember one guy I really enjoy. His name is Rod, and he lives in Oregon. And he and I knew each other for a long time, and we were hanging out at a ceremony, and some young guys came up who were just like in awe of Rod, because he's like an indigenous elder, really old, and all that stuff. And they came up to him and they said, "Rod, I want to be a healer just like you." And he said, "Well, then you've got to be a wino for 35 years."
Oh.
It was one of the greatest moments of my life.
Oh, that's great. Yeah. Uh,
But it was such a beautiful example of throwing out his own experience and also
yes.
owning
Yeah.
his experience as part of his
Yeah.
formation, you
Yeah.
know. Yeah. And and we're not supposed to do that in conventional practice.
Mm. Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah. We're supposed to pretend that we're perfect, I think, or
Yeah.
something like that. Yeah.
Yeah. Well, winding back around to your original question, I'm really excited to be deconstructing that. To use a word of the academy, I think it's
Right.
really
Right. Yeah.
breaking that one down. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah.
And I do go through times where I have experienced like just not knowing, having that internal conflict on, where can I um, where can I best serve and where can I be most authentic? And, there's that internal tension, that I'd want to validate for, individuals on this um, journey that are seeking to decolonize and themselves and also the systems, in which we work and also indigenizing, and because I hear many different viewpoints on what those words mean, but I'll just use them, more broadly. And so sometimes I struggle, as as I've already expressed to you in other conversations, on, oh my gosh, do I even belong here? Like, because I don't want to spend the rest of my life like resisting and, um, you know, uh, just like uh, trying to change everything there's a part of, me that just like I enjoy my life path so deeply, and maybe I just need to spend more time in that space. But then I think I can remember, um, you know, folks along the way, elders along the way saying, remember, Jen, like you're not like in keeping with Indigenous ways of knowing that, um, we have to, like, we're doing this work collaboratively, together. And it's conversations like this too, where, I feel that collaborative spirit, and that, we're not alone. And I know certainly, I've worked with amazing colleagues, Indigenous and non-Indigenous colleagues and, students at UNB who are deeply committed to this work. So sometimes when I get in my own head about it, about just how I'm like tired out and I feel like deflated and about certain things, I remember that, we're in this together and that it's a journey. And it's okay also to catch my breath and to, take periods of rest and nourish my own spirit, like giving myself permission, to do that. Because, it can be, I don't like to say that it's hard work, but it's heart work. And so there is a lot of uh, emotion in it, in that commitment, in that passion. And sometimes it's can be, there can be some naturally some discomfort, when we're working with oppressive systems. And even though my faculty may not feel that way, sometimes the broader academy, can feel that way. So that's why it's just so heartening too, Lewis, for me to hear about like the journal that's been created, the Two-Eyed Seeing journal. Like these things are just like, so I'm just so grateful for all the work that we're all doing together. And I think that when I get back into that headspace, I feel much more, inspired to keep doing this heart work.
Indeed, and my image is that we're all wild coyotes nipping at the heels of the mainstream from the margins of civilization, hiding in the shadows, darting out at the appropriate times, and running back to hide when danger appears.
I like that a lot. I love that.
Well, coyote is the only species that's spreading these days.
Oh, I love that. I really, really love that. Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah, they need their heels to be nipped at.
Mhm. Yeah. Yeah.
I'm reminded of Barbara and I did some essays on Thomas Merton and the Indians for an anthology of Thomas Merton studies. And it was fun, because we didn't really know much about Thomas Merton at the time. And so, but we liked the idea of the challenge of looking at his relationship with indigenous people. And one of the things that he said that I'll never forget is he said, always do the right thing even if you're sure that it won't work.
Mm. Yeah. 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 Yeah.
Yeah. And I
Yeah.
think that's what we're doing.
It's a
You
good
know,
one.
we're little people. We're pretty puny compared to the mainstream. You
Mm.
know, our funding is amazingly smaller compared to theirs.
Yeah.
And they're not going to give us a lot of money because we're too weird.
Yeah.
And here we are, persisting, like
Yeah.
good little coyotes should.
Yes. Yes. I love it.
Yeah.
I'm joining the pack.
Yeah. Yes, yes, we need packs all around. Every university needs a pack of coyotes.
Yeah, yes,
Yeah,
yeah.
yeah. I mean, because it, I don't know, like the mainstream perspective is so dead.
Mm,
I mean, from my point of view, it's just dead. It's so um, ossified and
mm,
rigid and boring.
yeah, yeah.
You know, it reminds me. There's a guy I really admire who's a professor at MIT. His name is Max Tegmark, and he has this amazing website on the multiverse. The many worlds theory of quantum physics, and he said that he asked in order to get tenure, he had to write 9 straight papers for every one weird paper. That was his formula. And apparently it worked as he got tenure at MIT.
Oh my gosh. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. It's those kinds of structures that I just don't know that I'll buy into in the academy. Um, that's not my passion. So yeah, I'm gonna it'll be interesting to see how that journey unfolds, but I'm deeply at this stage in the game. I'm deeply honored to, be like a faculty member and have the freedom to you know, do the kind of anti-oppressive work that I'm trying to do. But I'm not sure that I'll be um, getting caught up in the game of of whatever we want to call it. Yeah, I've got too many other things I'm passionate about. Yeah.
Right, right.
Mm.
Well, I think we're coming to the end of our conversation for tonight. And I really want to thank you for joining me. It's been a lot of fun, as always.
Yes. Yeah.
And hopefully we'll have more fun down the road.
I think so. I think so. Thank you so much, Lois. Thank
Thank
you.
you.